What if someone is watching you right now, and you're not even aware of their presence? The thought is so scary because it touches on an ancient fear that's baked into our DNA. For thousands of years, our ancestors lived in the jungle side by side with apex predators. And in the jungle, being watched meant that you were about to be attacked. But today we don't live in jungles, and the predators who stalk us aren't lions or tigers. They're human. Today's stories will make you realize that these human stalkers can be a whole lot creepier than any animal could ever hope to be. Before we get started, make sure you give us a like. Maybe leave a comment too, it really helps out the channel. The midnight gas station. He followed me home from the midnight gas station. That's all Lisa could say to the police officer who had no idea how to help her. The man who was after Lisa had no name or address. She wasn't even sure if he was a man or a ghost, because he was practically haunting her. And it all started, as Lisa said, at the midnight gas station. The station got its name back when Lanesboro was even smaller than it was now. There weren't many shops that stayed open at night, which made this gas station at the edge of town the only place you could go at midnight. If you needed anything after dark, you would need to drive 12 miles out to the midnight gas station. It stood alone on a desolate road with endless grass on both sides. Lisa had driven by this station countless times, but only during the day when it wasn't quite as creepy. But this time it was different, and not just because of the darkness, but because of what Lisa encountered. She had just pulled up to the fuel dispenser when she got this creepy feeling that someone was in the back seat. For a few seconds, Lisa was too terrified to even look in the rearview mirror, and when she did, the back seat was empty. Still, she had this feeling of being watched, which she talked herself out of. She had no other choice. Her tank was nearly empty. The last thing she wanted was to be stranded in the middle of nowhere with no gas and no lights around. At least at the station, there would still be some light and hopefully an employee. Lisa stepped out of the car and then walked over to the dispenser. It was so silent that she could hear her own footsteps. And when she stopped, the footsteps continued. Someone was walking right behind her. She could feel the weight of that person's shadow, but when she turned around, he was gone. All Lisa could see was the grass rustling. Keeping her eye on the grass, she fumbled around in her purse for her card. Then she looked at the machine as she made the payment and grabbed the nozzle quickly. She'd only had her eyes on it for about 5 seconds, but by the time she'd looked back, she saw a man staring right back at her. Lisa would have booked it, but she was outside of her car, which would take at least 2 minutes to refuel. If the man had made a run for it, he would have made it to Lisa before she could have gotten into her car. But he didn't move. Instead, he just stood still, continuing to stare at Lisa. It was then that she decided to call for help. "Can you come out here, please?" she shouted toward the store, hoping that the clerk would hear her. However, as she looked around, she made a terrible discovery. There was nobody working at the store. Just knowing she was all alone with that creep sent shivers up her spine. She then heard footsteps and saw that the man was moving closer. He was standing still again, but now he was a few meters closer. For some reason, he only moved when she looked away. She kept an eye on him as she pulled out the nozzle and returned it to its cradle. She walked around to the driver's side and got in, never breaking eye contact. But as soon as she sat down, the man started marching towards her. Lisa slammed her foot on the pedal and floored it past him. Her car zipped across the road as if it were filled with adrenaline instead of gas. Lisa did not take her foot off the gas until the dim lights of Lanesboro greeted her. Only upon entering the town did Lisa start to calm down. But it didn't take her long to realize that she had made a horrible mistake, one that would come to haunt her very soon. She'd been so focused on keeping her eyes on this strange man that she'd forgotten her purse at the pumps. She'd left it there on the ground by the fuel dispenser, but there was no way that she was going back to get it. There's always morning, she thought. Maybe there's somebody there decent enough to hold on to it for me. And with that, she carried on driving toward home. But all the way there, she had this uneasy feeling, as if some part of her were still aware that she was still in danger. She shook this feeling off as she pulled into her driveway. Then it hit her. Her keys were still in her purse. She'd driven all the way home, but had no way to get in. Still, she wasn't going back to that gas station. Instead, she drove 3 blocks over to her sister's, picked up her spare keys, and then headed home. A few minutes later, she was in her bedroom, relieved that the whole thing was over. She was so tired she didn't even spend any time on her phone, which was what she usually did before going to bed. At this point, all she wanted to do was sleep, not knowing that the worst was yet to come. The next morning, she woke up with heavy eyes and reached over for her water bottle, but she found her purse sitting in its place. This was the same purse that she'd left at the gas station the night before. In a mix of panic and confusion, she tore it open and fumbled through it, making sure everything was there. And everything was. Everything she had put into that bag was there, except for one thing. The only thing missing was her house keys. The cure for obsession. Sarah had just run out of the hospital. She knew that no one was going to believe her, but that was the least of her worries, because she was still running from who was chasing her. It all started last summer when Sarah's boyfriend dumped her with a single text message. One sentence, and it was all over. Sarah tried to ask for an explanation, but he had already blocked her everywhere. She was desperate enough to actually show up at his house, but to her surprise, it was totally empty. At least, that's what it looked like. No one answered the door and all the lights were turned off. Over the next few days, Sarah would intentionally take the long way home from work just to pass by his house, but it remained as silent as ever. In the end, Sarah had to accept the truth. Derek had moved town and didn't want anything to do with her. She was past the denial phase of her grief and very quickly became angry. She had given him 2 years of her life and been there for him at his worst. Even when Derek started loving alcohol more than he loved her, she stood by him. Back then, her relationship was the biggest problem in her life, but right now, all that looked laughably small compared to what she was running from. Sarah crouched behind a tree and listened intently for footsteps. What she had seen in the basement of the hospital was still fresh in her mind, and it somehow brought her back to last Valentine's Day, which she spent with Derek. He had gone over to the next town to buy her flowers because their town didn't have a proper flower shop. It was probably the nicest thing he'd ever done for her. Sarah was trying to use that memory to distract her from the terrifying situation she was in, but it didn't work as her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. A beam of light flooded the bushes next to her. A flashlight. He's got a flashlight. Sarah realized that the darkness wasn't going to protect her for much longer, so without thinking, she made a run for it. She ran quicker and quicker. She could hear the footsteps behind her picking up pace. Her stalker was running too, or at least she thought he was. Either way, she wasn't going to stop until she reached Bernard Square, the busiest place in town. A lot safer than the woods she was hiding in. But Bernard Square was still 4 miles away, plenty of time for the stalker to catch up to her. These thoughts were running through her head when, bam, she ran into a thick tree branch. Sarah had been knocked out. The months leading up to their breakup had been brutal. It was an ugly time, and Derek made things uglier with the things he'd said. She tried many times to leave him, but every time he apologized, she ended up accepting it and going back to him. Sarah's friends had drifted away because they were just too tired of her self-sabotage. They would support and comfort her through the breakup, telling her how she was better off without Derek, and then she'd go running back to him. So after a while, they stopped responding to her texts. Now, the only person she could confide in was Dr. Birch. He'd been her therapist for over a year, and he'd heard her complain about Derek over and over. But unlike her friends, Dr. Birch didn't chime in with demands like, dump that douchebag or we'll walk out of your life. That's the kind of thing friends do when they don't know what they're doing. But Birch wasn't a friend, he was a professional who listened without judging. Even when Sarah returned to him for the 6th time after getting back with Derek, he didn't seem disappointed. He didn't bash her or make her feel sad. He simply asked her if she could change one thing this time around, what would that thing be? And as always, she just responded with, I really do hope he has changed. Sarah could feel her own eyes roll as she said that, but Dr. Birch didn't judge her. He looked at her with the kind and concerned eyes of a loving mother. We can't change people, but people can change, he said. Greg, I'm gonna miss you so much, she blurted out. Dr. Gregory Birch was confused for a moment, but he picked up on what was happening. You don't want to continue seeing me, he asked. Sarah nodded. Because of Derek, he continued. She nodded again. For some reason, Derek had gotten it into his head that Dr. Birch was forcing Sarah away from Derek. He'd made her choose between him and the doctor. Sarah had chosen Derek, but 2 days later, he dumped her and disappeared. Sarah went back to Dr. Birch, who had kept her spot despite having a huge waiting list. He was the only therapist in town. In the days after, Dr. Birch helped Sarah get over the breakup, and things were starting to look up when Sarah made a terrible mistake. On the last Friday before Christmas, Dr. Birch had to leave his office for an emergency. Sarah, being his next patient, had to wait outside. But after a while, she grew impatient and began looking around. The secretary was not in their seat, and there was nobody else there. So Sarah simply walked into Dr. Birch's office. She had a crazy idea. She wanted to see what he thought about her, so she opened his drawer and went through the folders until she found her name. And when she opened it, a wave of terror came over her, because in the folder there were no notes, no remarks, only pictures that she hadn't taken of herself. Photos of her getting groceries, photos of her walking home, photos of her sleeping. Dr. Birch had been secretly obsessed with her. Was he the reason Derek had disappeared? Before she could think any further, she heard the sound of keys jingling on the other side of the door. The doctor was going to walk in at any moment, so Sarah rushed through the only other door in the office, the one by the bookshelf in the back. On the other side was a flight of stairs that Sarah flew down without thinking. All she knew was that she had to get away from Dr. Birch's office as fast as she could. And that's how she ended up in the basement, which was lit by a single tube light in the corner. Most of it seemed like it was under construction. Exposed bricks and piles of cement, but the far corner, that was the one that seemed to be in use, and there was a bed with someone sleeping in it. They can help me, Sarah thought as she got close to the bed. She couldn't raise her voice. Dr. Birch could hear her. So instead, she whispered to the sleeping person, "Excuse me, do you know a way out?" No response. She asked 2 more times and still no response. In the end, Sarah got frustrated and pulled the sheet back. There was a scream. And it took her a moment to realize the scream was coming from her own mouth, because lying on the bed was the embalmed body of her boyfriend, Derek. There was a massive stab wound near his neck. Sarah realized that Dr. Birch did this, and he had heard her scream. It was only a matter of time before he would come for her. In fact, she could already hear his footsteps. So she did what she could. She hid in the corner that was still dark. The steps continued. Sarah looked around for something she could use. The bricks? No, too risky. The sound of the steps had reached the base of the stairs. Dr. Birch was now standing in the basement. Sarah saw him look toward the bed, which was now uncovered. He knew something was up, so he turned in the other direction, in Sarah's direction. But by the time he locked eyes with her, she'd gotten closer with fists full of dried cement. She threw it in his eyes. He reeled back and covered his face, dropping the syringe she'd been holding. Sarah ran up the stairs and burst out the door. She kept running through door after door after door until she was out the main gate. Dr. Birch was still following her, so she kept on running until she inevitably ran into that branch. When she came to her senses, there was a man standing over her. But to her delight, it was not Dr. Birch nor anyone from the hospital. She could tell because he was in a cop's uniform. He walked her to his car and asked where she wanted to go. "Bernard Square," she said. The cop nodded and started driving. Sarah hesitated for a moment and then blurted out everything at once. "By the way, you need to arrest Dr. Birch. He's been stalking me, and he took photos of me while I was sleeping, and he killed my boyfriend." "Greg Birch?" Yes, he's obsessed with me. He was the one running after me when I ran into that tree." "Running after you?" "Yes, I had to break out of the hospital, but Derek's dead body's still there. You have to believe me." The officer seemed to mull this over for a minute and then turned the car around. "Okay, let's go arrest him." Sarah let out a sigh of relief and slumped back into her seat. 2 minutes later, they pulled up to the hospital. Dr. Birch was already standing at the gate with a stern expression on his face. He was flanked on either side. With him were 3 nurses. The officer rolled down his window. "This your patient?" "Yes," said Dr. Birch. "All right then, take her before she hurts someone." Sarah realized what was happening, but it was already too late. She kicked and thrashed, but the nurses managed to subdue her, and before she knew it, Dr. Birch had injected her with a tranquilizer. Sarah wrestled to stay conscious, but she started getting drowsy. The last thing she heard before fading away was the doctor's voice. "Don't worry, officer. I will take good care of her." The stranger on the phone. Aiden was at home when he realized he was not alone. He felt like the walls had eyes and they were all watching him. Every cell in his body was crying out for him to leave, to get out of here, but he knew whatever had been watching him was waiting on the other side of that door. It was hard to believe how different his life had been just 24 hours earlier. His mom had just packed her suitcase for a trip to California, where his dad had recently been stationed. She was going to be away for at least a week, which was a lot of freedom for 13-year-old Aiden. Having the whole house to himself without the constant interruption and judgment of his mother sounded like a dream come true. However, he had to put on his sad face and act like he was gonna miss her. "Come back soon," he said, while hoping she'd be away longer. "I will," said his mom before giving him a final hug, probably the 20th he'd received that morning. "I wish I could take you with me, but you know." "I know," he said. "Exams." And with that, his mom took off, leaving Aiden all alone. He would have thrown a party if he had any friends in this town, but as he'd moved there recently, he didn't know anybody. It was hard enough leaving all of his friends back in Glendale, but now he had joined this school halfway through the year. Everyone already knew each other, had their friends. There was no room in any group for him. So he found comfort in video games. The only problem was that his mom kept on interrupting him, telling him to go out and meet people. But with her gone, he was free to play as many games as he wanted. Or so he thought. The trouble began at 3 p.m., roughly 5 hours after Aiden's mom had left. 5 hours that he'd spent wearing out his PlayStation. But then his phone rang. Usually he'd let it ring until the caller gave up, a deserving punishment for somebody who chose to use the call feature instead of just texting. But this time, he had to answer because it could have been his mom. So, without even looking at the number, he picked up his phone. "Hello?" There was no answer from the other side. "Mom?" Still no answer. Just as he was about to hang up, he heard something. Loud, raspy breathing from the other end. Who's this?" Aiden was concerned, if not afraid, but the caller didn't respond, not a word. All he did was breathe into the phone. Somehow this was enough to convey his message. He wanted Aiden to be afraid, and it was working. The call ended within a minute, but it was enough to shake Aiden for at least an hour or two. He didn't even remember if he had ended the call or if the stranger had hung up. Either way, the first thing Aiden did was look up this number. It wasn't a number he'd ever seen, and it had been registered recently. Aiden concluded that the caller was probably from his class, someone trying to pull a prank on him. He had given out his number to do a couple group projects, and someone must have figured out that his mom would be gone. This explanation seemed to work enough, and soon Aiden was playing Yakuza. A few minutes with Ichiban Kasuga, the game's protagonist, was enough for Aiden to forget all about the call. At around 6 p.m., his hunger would not go unnoticed. He opened up the fridge and turned his nose up at all the healthy stuff that had been left there for him. That was the kind of stuff you ate when mom was around. Aiden was going to treat himself to the dirtiest junk food he could afford, so he grabbed his wallet and left the house. The nearest burger joint was 15 minutes away, 5 by car, but Aiden was walking. And as he was walking, he felt like somebody was walking behind him. It seemed like his footsteps had an echo, like somebody was trying their best to imitate his pace. Aiden looked around, but saw no one. The sidewalk was completely deserted. If someone was following him, they must have been invisible. Aiden told himself he was imagining things and kept on walking. Finally, he reached the burger spot and ordered himself a smash burger with an extra patty and curly fries. He loved the fries from this place because of their Nashville seasoning. "Extra seasoning on the fries, please." The cashier nodded and made a note. As Aiden waited for his order, the feeling he felt earlier came back. It was like he was being watched, but not by any of the fast food workers. It was someone else. Aiden looked around, but there was no one in the diner. Again, he talked himself out of this weird feeling. Don't be a coward. What are you gonna do? Be afraid of your own shadow just because mommy's not around? It wasn't the healthiest self-talk, but it worked. A few minutes later, his burger arrived alongside a mountain of curly fries. He finished the whole thing in what felt like just a minute. He ate like he was starving because he was starving. And the meal was so delicious that he just had to sit there for a minute and revel in the euphoria. Then he got up and started walking back toward home. This time, he wasn't worried about somebody watching him. He was too absorbed in his thoughts about Yakuza. He thought to himself, I might even be able to finish it before mom gets back. With that thought still in his head, he unlocked the front door and let himself in. Within moments, he was back playing Yakuza, completing some crazy side quest. Life was good again. But then his phone rang, and once again, Aiden answered. "Extra seasoning on the fries," said a deep, raspy voice on the other end. A mix of panic and dread shot throughout every fiber of Aiden's body. He was being followed, and the person had been close enough to hear his order. "What do you want?" Aiden asked, but the stranger had already hung up. Now, Aiden was too scared to get back to his game. He knew that if he started playing, the game would take up all of his attention and he wouldn't be aware of his surroundings. Then, another realization hit him. He had left the front door unlocked. Aiden ran downstairs as fast as he could and locked the door. He then pushed a couch up against it for good measure. But this wasn't quite enough to make him feel safe. He could call the police, but that would be too much. He could call his mom, but what could she do other than worry? She already worried too much. Aiden was still weighing his options when the phone rang again. "What do you want?" he snapped at the caller, his anger covering up his fear. "Don't you want to play Yakuza?" the voice on the other end asked before hanging up. Aiden's heart almost fell out of his front pocket. The sheer terror of the realization hit him hard. The stalker wasn't just close enough to hear his order at the diner. He also knew what he'd been playing in the comfort of his own room. Aiden called 911 immediately. He told the operator he was being stalked by someone who could hurt him. An officer's on the way, assured the voice on the other end. "Do not leave the house until you hear the sirens." Aiden waited for what felt like an hour, but it was only 15 minutes. Soon, a police cruiser pulled up in his driveway. Aiden moved the couch aside and dashed to the vehicle, not even bothering to say a word to the officer in the front of it. He checked for a way to lock the doors because he didn't know how cop cars worked. They locked automatically once shut. That was how officers would apprehend criminals. "Can we go to the station? I really want to get as far away as I can from here," he blurted while looking for a way to lock the door. "It's already locked," he assured him as he began to drive. Aiden waited for his house to disappear from sight before he let out a sigh of relief. He was just starting to relax when he noticed something strange. The officer driving the car wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing regular clothes, and his hands, they were covered in blood. This wasn't an officer. This was someone who'd probably killed the officer and stolen the car. The thought terrified Aiden, but he had to confirm it. So with a trembling hand, he pulled out his phone and called the stalker back. A second later, the driver's phone started ringing. And that brings an end to our 3 terrifying stalkers stories for today. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss more videos like this. Thanks for watching.